Perfect.
The LinkedIn Live didn't happen, so I'm not live on LinkedIn.
So we'll have to give LinkedIn its due at some other point, I guess.
Yep. Now I'll post a video later on in LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, we got to get Google and Microsoft equal opportunity. I guess you should post it on Apple and Netflix as well, so we cover all the fangs.
Yep. Let me post the live link on LinkedIn as well. Ah. Let me copy the streaming link and put it here.
I think we also got cartoons going on in the background there.
Who? Am I?
I don't know, but there is some. It sounds like it's a cartoon, but it might be something else.
Now there are no cartoons, no kids at home, so so there's no chance of any cartoons now.
Huh? Then it's something else, maybe.
Are the sounds?
Yeah.
Is that the fan that you're hearing? Is it gone?
No, it's definitely like it's from a TV.
No, there's no TV on. Let me close the door just to make sure it's not.
There we go.
Yep, my son had another call going.
There you go.
Yeah. So we have three of us here.
And this is Alan showing up.
Yep. And yep, Alan showing up. There should be a couple of people for certain who will join in. I know that they should be joining in any moment. Let's give people another 2 minutes and then let's start. One of the things with LinkedIn events is that unless the you're never certain that people are going to join in even after they register.
Yes, that's very true. So when we do invites on LinkedIn, we try to convert them to Zoom events. Actually,
It's been both. I've done that as Zoom invites. Yeah.
and then something like 50% convert for us. Well, so far somewhere 40-50% converts into Zoom events, and then well, depends on who they are, how well they convert later. So I think regardless, it makes sense to connect this, and then let's just record it, and you can put
Yep.
it on YouTube or whatever, and
That's right.
you'll get something to put on there.
Yep.
So let's just have a discussion.
Yeah.
And Alan, I don't know if you want to join or if you want to stay out.
Guys, maybe you guys can take it together. Yeah, I'll stay
I
out.
think so.
Yeah, because it'll be
We'll see if
more
someone else
coherent.
shows up.
Yeah, I'll just be silent.
Thanks, Johan, for joining in on the Innovation Dialogues today. Good evening, friends. I have with me Johan Persson. He's based out of Stockholm, and he works as a director at Innovation 360. Johan brings in close to 15 years of experience in the area of innovation. He has a master's in innovation and authorship from INSEAD, and he works with organization on innovation strategy, growth strategy, scenario planning, etc. Welcome, Johan, and thanks for joining in today's event.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be with you, Krishnan. I was going to
Thanks.
say I'm very happy to join you here in India, but obviously I'm not in India given these times. So that's just how it is.
That is right. And
Next time.
the topic is very close to what the invisible virus has done to all of us, COVID. I heard one of my friend in the IT industry say that COVID has done for digital transformations what in IT officers couldn't do, or chief innovation officers couldn't do for ages, which is to get organization to move to a digital world and see how they can transform themselves. We've seen that within our country. We have seen that there have been a huge number of organizations which have transformed in this time. There have been industries which have been destroyed because of COVID, because their customers' habits have changed due to COVID. We have seen IT companies deciding to work from home permanently in many cases, and so tremendous amount of changes that have come as a result of the virus. And one of the things that I wanted to have a discussion with you is that how do you see the new normal, and what are the factors that you see in your part of the world? How are things changing? Are there things changing faster than what they were before?
So I think you touched upon some very interesting points about how this has actually transformed many organizations and the way they are working. we have made here quite a few investigations, and I worked with one of the public sector representatives in Sweden during the summer to do a large investigation around what effects did COVID have on digitalization. And what we found out is that actually here in the West, or rather here in Sweden, the infrastructure for having a digital workplace was very built out. They'd all made large investments into it. However, it wasn't being used. So the organizations were not ready. It just took them this major change and this major transformation and this major outside threat in a sense to start using it. So it's really been an eye-opening experience in terms of it's just not building the technical capability. It's about getting your organization in check, getting your organization to actually adopt to what's there, getting your organization to buy in to the digital transformation, buying in to whatever change it is really that you're trying to make, right? So whether that's innovation, whether that's a new growth trajectory, whether that's looking at new opportunities, unless your organization is with you, it's not going to work. And sometimes it can take a crisis to really get going. So I think that's the same kind of lesson learned all over the world. And I don't think it's more here than where you are. I think it's really quite a global thing.
Isn't it interesting is that for long, the digital was, people attempted to use digital in the way they did their existing work. And during COVID, we have realized that you can actually do things very, very differently. And you are actually seeing the power of some of these techniques and tools. And that's transforming businesses in very, very different ways.
Yeah, and I think it's transforming businesses. It's transforming the processes businesses are putting up with. All of a sudden, if you had any remnant of something that had to be done on paper, that's probably now gone, or your business is gone. It's really quite interesting, and obviously, it's changing the lives of people that are working at these businesses as well. I think in many of the places in this world, there's a lot of commuting that used to happen. I mean, myself, I live relatively centrally in Stockholm, but I've saved at least an hour per day now that we've completely switched to a digital delivery. So think about all this time that's being freed up across the globe, right? When working remotely, and I think that's been a benefit to my life, and I think it's been a benefit to many people's lives in terms of just having more time on their hands to a less stressful day, just from having that time to do a bit more of the things that matter. On the other hand, of course, it also means that you're always on. You don't have that time to relax, which of course is a different issue, but which can really well, that can have other effects, of course. So I think for me personally, I shouldn't make predictions. That's we will talk about that later, how you should actually think about scenarios. But if I am to make a prediction, I think at least working partly remote is going to be a new reality for many people. Because you see some of the benefits, well, a lot of the benefits from it.
That's true. And that leads to looking at how are our world changing? What is the things that are going to change and how does it impact life? I know that you have been contributing heavily in this area. We have all learned about PESTL as a tool in our B schools. PEST-led has been a powerful tool that has been talked about for a pretty long time. The scenarios toolkit that was developed in the UK by the government there has been there for quite a long time. And how do you see that? How do you see the interest into some formal toolkit like that?
Well, I think you have to start with sort of the why, right? I'm not a massive fan of Simon Sinek, but the whole start with why thing, I think he got right. So why do you care about these tools? It's because for many organizations right now, they feel like they are in turmoil. There are so many changes. There is so much uncertainty. It feels like everything is uncertain. It feels like everything is going to happen in the world, and everything is going to happen to your organization. So by using frameworks and tools, it's a way to start sorting out what's going on in the world and whether you should pay attention to absolutely everything that hits you from social media, from news sites, from TV, from all over the place. Because it's very easy to just become completely stressed out and in some sense paralyzed by all this change that's being thrown in your face. When in reality, it's probably the case that there are a few things that's really affecting you, and that's what you should pay attention to. So I think that's the first reason why Pestled matters in times like these, right? It's that you can make sense of your environment. And then if you think about what's next, so Pestled is about figuring out, okay, what are the macro factors that may or may not affect us? The next step, if you think about what a scenarios toolkit is, figuring out what of those things that's affecting us, do we know if some of these things are relatively certain that they're going to happen? We may not know exactly to which degree, but we're pretty sure it's going to happen. And we know roughly what the outcome is going to be. And when you've actually sat down and looked at the macro drivers that's affecting you, you can usually have a pretty good feeling around that. And then you can think about, out of all of these macro factors that we've decided to look at, are they all going to affect us very much? And the likelihood is that it's going to be a limited amount that's affecting us. And then you can also then sit down and say, out of all of these macro factors, a few of them are going to affect us quite heavily, so they're going to be important. And then some of them, we don't really know what's going to happen. There are the outcome that we see in maybe 10 years time, it could be really far left or really far right, or the other way around, wrong hands.
Yeah.
And just having done that analysis will get you very far in calming down, essentially. You know that some of these things, we know they're going to happen. We need to prepare for them. Let's just put them into our operational plans. Let's put them into if we have a long-term strategy, let's just deal with them, right?
Yep.
And then you have the uncertainty, and then you have to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah. Very interesting point that you made, that every factor might not be important. And I think that you made a very important breakthrough there about crowdsourcing what are the important ones. You don't have to do all of it. You don't have to discover everything yourself, isn't it? So can you tell us about a little bit about how you managed to crowdsource information about what are those important factors?
Yeah. So the stuff I've been talking about here with the Pestled is something that you would normally do in like a strategy team, or you have an internal function that does it, or maybe you even hire some consultants to do it, right? And that's fine, but obviously you will probably get much better results if you can actually engage your whole organization, or even stakeholders to your organization, like your customer or your suppliers. And to do that in an effective way, you need to have software. That's pretty much as simple as that. And we have created the software to do Pestled analysis. So part of the benefit of it is this, that you can collect the macro drivers and what you think is what's going to affect your organization from a large number of people from many sources. The second, of course, is that once you have this in software, you get a collection, you get a database, you get a picture of what the rest of the world sees. And that's also where software comes in. So once you've built up this database, it's a much easier proposition to get a good pestlet analysis done, essentially. So those are the two aspects that we see why you would want to use software for this.
And
there's
it
also
obviously-
actually a third reason, which is when you have it in software, when you have things in place, when you have an efficient way of gathering information, it means you can do it more often. Instead of doing it every 5 years, you can do it every year or every 6 months or every month if you really feel that you want to.
And you can do it extremely fast.
Yes, exactly. That's before we had software, we would do this using Post-it notes. It's just a process that, okay, it works fine, but you won't do it that often because it's just so cumbersome and slow. So yeah, it's the same as any other software. Like you can write an essay using an old typewriter. It works fine, but if you have to type a lot of documents, it's much easier if you have a word processor. Same idea.
Yep. And that brings us to the next question that everyone talks about: factors affecting them. What are the things that impact them? One of the key things that I have talked about and I keep writing about is the ability to imagine what your future looks like. If you really look at it, the biggest changes in lives have happened simply because there is someone out there, some very smart entrepreneur or technologist or businessman who's able to imagine what the future will be. Okay, so how do you bring that ability to everyone? And that's the purpose of the entire Futures Toolkit, isn't it? The entire scenario planning methodology.
Yeah, I mean, it's a way to sort of anticipate changes that may or may not happen. It's a way to prepare your organization for possible new futures, right? And I always think so. Creativity and being, insightful is something that you, to some degree, can train if you just have the right mind and you train your mind to think about it. And if you have some sort of frameworks that can support that thinking, it's really helpful. And that's how you use the scenarios toolkit.
And something that Shell has specialized for a very long time. They are very famous for generating Futures Toolkit. And so tell me about the scenario planning work that you have done. I know that you have been one of the key guys behind the Scenario 360 tool.
Yeah, so we've been working, as I said, we've been working with PestLed and also scenarios for quite some time. And again, when thinking about the scenarios toolkit tool or scenarios 360 tool, it's the same sort of reasoning as behind the PestLed 360 tool, where if you have a tool to help you, you're able to do it much more often because you have the information in place, you have a methodology in place, and you don't have to keep track of things outside of the digital world. So that's sort of the whole idea. So once you have a digital tool, running workshops, developing scenarios, developing a multiple of scenarios just becomes way easier and way faster. So if we think back to how I see a lot of our customers or a lot of our clients, how they've used scenarios in the past, what's happened is they've developed maybe 3-4 scenarios, and then they take them pretty far and they talk about a future in these scenarios, which is interesting, and they make movies and they make all kinds of descriptions, which is great for communicating around what are the scenarios that we possibly see here in the future. And that's great. But the strategic impact from doing that, when you do it in such a sort of limited scale, can be less than maybe it should be. So if you have the ability to develop a lot more scenarios, like 7, 10, even, I mean, 20 is maybe overdoing it. If you can do that, it allows you to look at commonalities between all these different futures and start to see, okay, so we know that these are extreme futures that we're looking at, but maybe there are some commonalities which can actually lead us to anticipate certain changes that we have to make just to be ready when these futures come. And whether these futures represent an opportunity or whether these futures represent a threat, there may be sort of common things that we can do to prepare that are obviously good ideas now that we've investigated these futures, but that were not obvious before we did the analysis. So that's something that we see as a change now that you have a much higher capability of creating scenarios, essentially, just from having an efficient tool in place.
How do you utilize them? What have people typically, your clients, how have they used them in their
So
their
why don't
strategy?
I give you one very clear example? So we've been working, and this is an example I typically give because I personally love it. So it's from the space industry. And in the space industry, there are very exciting things happen. I think you have to live, essentially you will have to live on another planet if you don't know what a guy called Elon Musk is doing in the space industry, right? So, and just to clarify what he's doing, so he's building rockets, and the rockets can now land. So instead of you shooting a rocket into space and it's just crashing into the ocean and you can never do anything with it, you're now reusing the rocket. And this is decreasing the cost of launching a kilogram of whatever it might be into space a lot. We're talking orders of magnitude cheaper. So that's one thing that's really affecting the space industry. Another thing that's affecting the space industry is the fact that you're starting to see clusters of satellites, small cheaper satellites in near orbit instead of having large, very expensive satellites far away from the Earth. And that's where the industry is sort of shifting, partly driven actually by this lower cost of launch. And this is a major challenge. And there's other things going on as well. So we work with a satellite manufacturing company that their current business model is these large satellites far from the Earth, but they see that the business is shifting. So how can that happen? What is going to happen in the future? What are going to be the aspects of products in space in the future? Is the business model the same? All of these things. So we work with them to try and figure out, okay, given the certain and uncertain trends that you see, what could a future product portfolio look like for you? And we worked with sort of a cross-organizational team to develop these scenarios with them. And what came out was really quite interesting and a great mix really of new technology, new business models, and essentially just new ways that this particular company could possibly expand and make satellites less of a very, very high-end, hard-to-reach product and more available to a much wider audience, essentially, opening up their platform for startups, all kinds of things, which kind of thoughts that they probably hadn't thought before, but that were now kind of evident that, yeah, given these changes, this makes total sense in these scenarios. And then looking at them all of these scenarios that we developed, we could come up with, okay, so these are the possible products. What are the changes that has to happen to our organization, to our company, given that these futures may or may not happen? And we could boil it down to, okay, so these are things we have to look at now if we're going to be successful in a quite uncertain future in this industry. So very, very engaging work, and obviously an area, me as an old engineer and physicist, loving it.
But interesting word you used, something that we should do now for the future. And that's the key operational word, isn't it? A lot of people keep missing that word, is that innovation and looking at the future does not mean what you will do in the future, but what you do need to do today to get your future right, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. How do you prepare I mean, you got to be kind to the future you, right? Your organization has to be kind to the future
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah.
It's
A lot,
no.
yeah, a lot of what will come 5 years ahead will have to happen today.
Yeah, and I mean, the larger the organization we're talking here, I mean, the bigger the inertia to any change, the longer it will take to decide, the longer it will take to get all stakeholders on board. So the larger you are, the more critical it is that you actually start moving.
And Elon Musk is the best example. 10 years ago, if everybody laughed at him on his vision of taking people out to Mars, he has taken people to the certainly to the space station. Big achievement, and I think that he's well on his way to taking people to Mars. But then he had to do it 10 years ago, not today.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also the fact that, so I think Elon, I mean, in some ways he's a great example, and in some other ways maybe not. But I think here is a great example of where you have to accept an amount of uncertainty in what you do now in order to have this massive success that he's had in essentially all of his ventures. Then maybe you shouldn't put all your. So I know with SpaceX, they had one rocket left, and if it had exploded, everything would have gone to smithereens, economically speaking. But that's what you need to. That's where you need to be, right? Taking those risks, looking at uncertainty and accepting it, and making, because where there's uncertainty, that's where real opportunity lies.
And so if I have to capture it in a very a way that would make sense to most businessmen, what you're saying is that our growth truly depends on our ability to look at the future.
I mean, I would say so in many cases, because obviously if you are somewhere or in a business that's growing at a marvelous pace right now, then it's going to be difficult to make this happen. But marvelous growth rates mostly don't continue. We are innovation. I'm not going to call us innovation nerds, but let's say we're innovation practitioners, and we talk a lot about S curves, right? So when you're in a vertical part of an S curve, it's essentially exponential growth, and you can be there. But sooner or later, that S curve planes out, and you're in a situation where your competitors are breathing down your neck. It's a red ocean. It's not a blue ocean. All of these things. And if you had acted and accepted uncertainty 5 years ago, maybe you wouldn't be in that situation. So if you want to continue that growth curve, for sure. And if you're already in that red ocean, then if you didn't do it 5 years ago, then now is the time to start looking at it before things turn downhill. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah. Oh, that brings us quite close to the end of our half an hour of chat. If I would like to summarize what I've heard from you, and that is that you could make a huge difference the way you manage your growth by adopting a systematic approach to scenario planning and looking at the future. And it creates a portfolio of opportunities for you, not just one. And so it's about how many of these scenarios that you can develop. And what you have managed to do is bring in the latest thinking from the in terms of cloud computing and artificial intelligence into bringing IT-enabled tools. Is uh, is that a very nice way of summarizing what you've done with uh, Pest Lid and Scenario 360?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. It really, I mean, as I said, having a proper tool just enables you to do things much faster and much more often than you did before, and that's it's just going to increase the benefit you get from it.
Hmm. I have a couple of people who've logged in here, Gitanjali and Nalina. Do you have any questions for Johan?
Hi, Johan. Geeta here.
Hello.
Johan, my question was related to the dynamics that we are experiencing by virtue of the pandemic and the rate of change in technology per se. When you lead scenario planning exercises for your clients, what is the kind of time horizon that you look at? And confidently, if I might add that adjective.
It's really gonna depend. So that's a very boring answer, of course. So and a very sort of consulty answer, but it really is gonna depend on which organization we're talking about. But that being said, usually for scenario planning, we talk about how 5 years is a bit short. 10 to 15 years is probably for a large organization what you want to think about. But then if you are maybe a government or some sort of public body that will see change over even longer time frames, that also makes sense. When it comes to very fast moving trends such as COVID, I could foresee doing shorter scenario planning exercises as well, like maybe 5 years. If you do it too short, you lose a little bit of the value of the exercise. But those are that's sort of how I think about it. And when I do work with client, that's what we look at. And obviously, if someone wants a specific time frame or they have a specific time frame in mind, we discuss it and we look it over and we see, okay, does this make sense? Does it not make sense given their situation and given how fast the particular trends that they feel affected by are moving?
Understood. Understood. The second question that I had was, once you do a scenario planning exercise, there is obviously a need to keep revisiting the scenarios which get generated and keep track of shifts that are actually happening, plus the impact of the initiatives that we might be taking. So, how do you work with your clients over this journey of 5 years or 10 years normally, as as someone who's the expert in the field?
So the idea when we work with clients is that we may lead the first exercise and maybe the second exercise if they redo it. But the idea is always to try and transfer the knowledge to the organization. As that's how we work, and that's how we always try to work, is that we are not someone that does the job for you. We will lend a hand, but in a sense, that's what we want to do in the beginning. But over time, we want your organization to be able to do this yourself. Because honestly, you know a lot more about your business than we ever will. You know a lot more about what you're worried about in the world than we ever will. And if you have digital tools that can support your process so that you keep everything, it's continuous, you can go back and revisit, you can see, okay, this is what we did 1 year ago, this is what we did 2 years ago. You get help, you have a database that helps you populate your pest led, you have a tool to help keep track of scenarios. It's completely possible for an organization to do this by itself and to do it often. And I mean, obviously, then they can come back if they feel like they have a need, or if they lost people and they need to retrain. But that's how we see it. So, and that's our aim. Our aim is not to be with an organization for 10 years doing this. It's teach them how to do it, and then they would do it continuously for 10 years and call us if they have a problem. That's essentially how I see it, and that's how I think that's by far the most efficient way of doing it, I would say.
Sure. Thank you.
Nalina?
Hi.
You
Yeah,
have a
hi.
question?
Hi, Krishnan as well. Yes, hi, Ann.
Hi, Nalina.
I have dabbled a bit with scenario planning and even studied companies using some of the models. I've always been curious, what are some assumptions that typically tend to go south, rather not work out?
So I think one of the assumptions is that you're trying to predict the future. And you're trying to predict the future, and you're trying to actually work from the scenario as if it's sure that it's going to happen. So you overcommit to the scenario. So we have a client that we haven't done the scenario analysis with, but they've used scenarios to sort of plan their development portfolio, where they say, okay, so we don't know if this world is going to happen, or that world, or the fourth world. So we have to develop for all of them at the same time. And that's just not the way I think you should think about scenarios. How you should think of it is, okay, we have these very disparate worlds, like very different worlds. But given the changes they will impose on us, are there commonalities that we can address? And that's sort of where I see that the real power of scenario analysis comes in, when you think about what you should actually do in your organization. So there's value in exploring these futures and figuring them out and making movies so that people can imagine them. But getting too focused that these are the futures that we can see, and this is what we actually develop for, I think that's one of the sort of big pitfalls that I see. You need to take one step more, look at the commonalities and think, what are commonalities? What are certain things we can do to prepare for these uncertain futures, not think of them as reality.
And that's one of the reasons why I think you should be using as many people to provide inputs, isn't it? And use cross-functional capability. You need anthropologists, you need technologists, you need people who know what are the trends that is happening, and combine everything. So you need people who can potentially contribute to it, rather than using just consultants to come and tell you that these are things that we foresee happening.
Nalina, I don't know since you've been involved in this area yourself, what do you, is that something you've seen yourself, or have you seen other issues from scenario planning?
Yeah, one of the typical issues, and which one really needs to tackle right in the beginning, is the client says, I know this is the problem. Can you just dwell deeper and figure out why is it happening? So it's not so much the why, but what first. So that takes quite some effort to convince the client that we have to go back to step number 0, which is the what.
Yeah.
That's true.
Very good point.
Okay, that brings us towards the close of the time that we had said, 4:40. Thanks, Johan, for your wonderful contribution to improve our knowledge, and the time that you took off from close to Christmas vacation. I guess you must be.
Yes.
You must be packing your bags for your holiday.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us
not so
today.
much packing this year, unfortunately, but yeah, that's for sure. And thank you for having me. I hope next time we'll see each other face to face.
Hopefully sometime in the next year.
Yeah, let's hope so.
And thanks, Nalina and Geetanjali, for joining in. And for those that are catching it on YouTube and LinkedIn, thank you very much for joining in today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting us know, Krishnan. Thanks. Bye. Yeah. Have a safe Christmas, both of you.
And have a nice Christmas.